Ministério da Cultura e a Associação Casa Azul apresentam 21ª Flip, Festa Literária Internacional de Paraty. A Flip conta com benefício da Lei de Incentivo à Cultura, Lei Rouanet, PRONAC 231427, e possui acessibilidade para pessoas com deficiência física, visual e auditiva. Tem patrocínio Master, Instituto Cultural Vale. Patrocínio Ouro, Itaú, CCR e Caixa. Patrocínio Prata, o Globo, MAC Imóveis e Sebrae. Patrocínio Bronze, Globo Livros e Eletronuclear. Parceria institucional SESC. Prefeitura de Paraty, Embratur e Museu do Território. É uma concepção, Associação Casa Azul. Realização, Ministério da Cultura, Governo Federal, Brasil, União e Reconstrução. Flip, o encontro da literatura com a cidade.
Good evening. I am Eliane Brito, one of the curators for Flip, along with Fernanda Bastos. We are here with your nerves. This will deal with difficulties that have to do with the guests, poetics, their daily lives, the translation profession, and other topics that will be conducted by our dear Patrícia Lino, a professor of UCLA, poet, translator, multi-artist, and she will guide us in this very special conversation. So good evening, and then we have more things to come. So enjoy.
Olá, olá.
Hello again. Good evening, all, one and all. It is an immense pleasure to open the 12th session and to have the presence of Laura Wittner, Eliane, Marques, and Lubi, Prates. I will very briefly introduce the authors. Laura Wittner was born in Buenos Aires. She graduated in literature by the University of Buenos Aires. She is a translator, a poet, literary critic, and also a professor. She has written, among other things, of Lugares donde uno no está, and different children's book. In 2023, two of her works will have Brazilian editions. The Tradução da Estrada, Tradução da Ruta, and also with the translation of Luciana de Leone and Estela Rosa, and also the essays book, Live and Translate, Viver e Traduzir, Se Vive e Se Traduce, published by Bazar do Tempo, and translated by Maria Cecilia e Paloma Vidal. She was born, Eliane Marques was born between Brazil and Uruguay. She's a poet, novelist, essayist, psychoanalyst. She has published the poetry book Relicário, E Se Alguém O Pano, The Poço das Marianas, and the most recent novel, Louças de Família, published by Autêntica. Currently she's writing Quando a Conversa Começa na Cozinha, for a psychoanalysis that is African-centric, and also Divã Negro, both edited by Autêntica. She's also a translator of the Virginia Brindes de Salas and Marcela Villavella. She's a coordinator of the African Poetry School, and she has a column in the Zero Hora newspaper. Lubi Prates was born in São Paulo. She's a poet, translator, publisher, and a curator for literature. She dedicates herself to actions that will deal with the invisibility of women and Afro-descendants or blacks. And she has a PhD in psychology and human development. And she published Coração na Boca, Tris, Corpo Negro, and more recently in 2021, Até Aqui. She has many publications in different anthologies, national and international publications. She co-organized literary festivals for the visibility of poets. Eu sou poeta, I am a poet, and Outro Modo de Ser in Barcelona. And she also participated in different literary festivals in Brazil, Latin America, and Europe. And she is a co-founder and editor of Nossa Editora. And she translated, among other things, complete poetry of Maya Angelou. And before I pass the floor to my guests, I will ask the three of them to read a poem. So let's start with Laura.
Good evening, one and all. Before I read, I would like to thank this invitation, acknowledge it, and to all of you who have come to listen. The poem is called We Are Doubling for the Libertarian. Jacarandá, my daughter says, is like a tree from another world with this violet colored, cannot be in the same plane as us. There should be always a conversation like this if they come to me with this girl.
You will read her translation into Portuguese. So I will read the Portuguese translation of the poem that Laura has just read. We turned into Libertadores Avenue. My daughter says she thinks that the jacarandá tree is like a tree from another world. That this brumalhães cannot be of the same plane as all of us. Every time, I've always wanted to have such a conversation, and it happens exactly with this daughter.
Gracias. Quería aclarar que los poemas están traducidos al portugués por Luciana de Lima.
This poem has been translated in Portuguese by Luciana. Good evening. I would wish to thank, first of all, my ancestors, my people that came before me, who paved the way for me to be here this evening with you. I want to also thank my publisher, publishing house Autêntica, my publisher Rafaela Lamas, who spared no effort for me to be here. And I wish to especially thank the curators, Fernanda and Melinda, like the curators, Fernanda Bastos and Milena Brito.
So I'm going to read an excerpt of my last book, and you might decide if it is a poem, if it's not a poem, or something transgender. This is what's left of her deaths. Unpaid bills, luz agua, shirts, T-shirts. It's written, Jesus also loves you. Purchased in installments from a sister from the church, as poor as convicted of her superiority. Tiny things, so huge for those that have to support it, for those that stay behind to pay, to keep it clean, to clean her portrait. Your cell bill, your portable cell bill, no, I don't think I use any kind of cell phone. I would like to want to thank especially our Orishas for allowing me to be here today. When I started coming to Flip in 2005, 6, 7, I wasn't capable of dreaming that one day I would be a poet, that one day I would be a poet with published works in different countries, and that one day I would be sitting here in front of you. So my participation here is something that I believe that I am creating spaces so that I can exist in dignity and in poetry. And this is why I also thank Milena Brito and Fernanda Bastos for the invitation.
Quem tem medo?
Who's afraid of the word black when it does not go beyond the pages of a dictionary and a history book? Who's afraid of the word black or Negro when it is static or surrounded by other worlds in the police registries, police reports? Who's afraid of the word black when it transforms in mulatto, mixed race, or something close to almost white? Who's afraid of the word black if when I say it, silence is made? Who's afraid of the word black that I do not pronounce? Who's afraid of the word black when it does not make me a person, flesh, bones, and fury? Thank you to all our authors. And before I pass on to my questions, I would like to remind you that you have little slips of paper on your seats, and you might write your questions and submit it in writing to me. So my first question is for you, Laura. And I will quote from your book, Viver y Traducir. To translate is to self-analyze yourself. To translate is to continue to live. To translate is to ask if many times a day, is this how you say it, or I'm making this up? And finally, translate is to unnaturalize and then naturalize all over again and then denaturalize all over. So, how would you comment on these four statements with the creating a poem of the translations in your Traducción de la Ruta? It seems that it is more than obvious that the practice of translation cannot be in any way separated from the practice of the writing itself and the other way around.
It's a beautiful question, actually, because it makes me think that there was for me prior to now, prior to writing and prior to translating. Writing came long before translating. I had this kind of thinking that's kind of magical, but it comes from, on the one hand, the matter and tools for writing and for translating are somewhat the same. They're the words the sound, but meanwhile it's necessary to have a kind of attention and curiosity, meticulous and extreme curiosity towards everything that happens. What is the world saying that isn't me? The words that are not my words. And I believe that this happened even before I began to learn to read and write. Like the quest to translate myself. This means this, that, and the other, perhaps to translate other people or other persons or other people, what the world is saying or what another language is saying. I say it like this. I think that in this sense, they come together, writing and translation. And I believe that when I wrote, but before I started translating, because I hadn't learned a second language yet, at any rate, there was a kind of translation in this writing.
Do you think you could consider writing poetry itself as a sensorial experience when you're writing a poem? Could it make it sensorial? It will be a five senses translation.
Yes, certainly. I don't know if always the five senses, all five of them, but it's a translation, a sensory translation filtered by a line of thinking and reasoning in comparison with other sensations. But the first thing that happens, I think, is this: with which words I can say this sensation in these words, in which order they're going to be, and how you're going to relate them to each other. And it's practically the same procedure that translating from another language.
If we consider a poem as the way that words walk, there's Abel Neves said that to write, it is to walk among words. It's a theft. And translation could be also considered a voluntary theft and with a permission to steal. Maybe.
How is it the words walk? I think you have to make them walk a little bit and move. I think that perhaps in poetry one can trust a little bit more in this first movement, intuitive movement. I think that in translation, from the very first moment, you have to offer a pathway. Since the words are accommodated, you have to rearrange them and forget them and denaturalize them and naturalize them again. But it doesn't appear to me that translation can occur in such a spontaneous and free way as sometimes happens with the first draft of writing poetry. I think it's a much more guided task, and guided, I would say.
Thank you, thank you. My second question is for Eliane. Eliane, the sound quality of your poetry, for instance, in the Oposo das Marianas, which was published in 2018, is an indication not only of the formal rigor with which you write, but also your relationship with what is in terms of political content, but always the fact that you have one of the most interesting hearing of your generation. And I will read an excerpt. Over the fat noses like beans, and maybe the hiccup of the shells in the wells, and its thoughts and its shadows. Recently, you published your first novel called Losas de Família. It's very difficult to define. And in this specific case of this novel, it seems that the formal rigor of your text, especially the rhythm of your writing, will open a space for other Elianes come through and reveal themselves in the prose through different exercises of humor, parody, confusion between what is or isn't real, fiction, non-fiction, and at the same time, It will question everything from the white comfort and the privilege that you are allowed to have past, the memories, and of course the holding truth in your hand, as well as traditional concepts of authorship, imports what is an author, what is a narrator, what is a reader. So how was it for you, Eliane, in technical terms and in content terms, to skip from poetry to novels? Can you share with us the differences from one and the other productions? What allowed you to write, what took you to writing Losas de Familias? Thank you, Patricia, for your question. I'm not sure if I took this leap from poetry to what is called prose. I'm not sure if we should work with this binarity, as if we had to decide between male and female, between white and non-white, between poor and rich. It seems that this division between prose and poem, we know that is not originary, that initially everything was considered poetry, and then due to political issues, this separation happened. So when Losas de Familia is written by me, it is written as a rhythm. All my poetry is written as a rhythm, as a pace, as if it was a thumping pulsion. I don't have ideas and say, oh, I'm going to write based on this or that idea, or I want to convey this or that message. I want to produce a work of art, and that my reader, those who might access that work, will be able to feel it, not necessarily understand it. We live in a world of communication, of information, and all the time we are demanded to understand. Know, not know, understand, not understand. Literature for me is a work of art. And as such, you are able to access it through other pathways, and not necessarily by reason. This is why you need to have the pace, the imagery that will also create this rhythm, which is you're calling formal rigor, which was very difficult to abandon in Losas de Familia. When we came into the livings, and this is also a reference to the Yoruba culture, of which we are heirs, where you have this distinction between these different worlds, the world of the living, of the dead, and the separations and the transitions, which allows me to be in this transition process. So when we're here among the living, we are cut by what? No, it won't be someone who will be cutting our umbilical cord, but we are cut by the language. And we are cut by this, and this will make us the subject of our own language. It's very difficult to leave this behind. Maybe if you sing or read a poem, you don't need to know that that is a poem. Someone will tell a story. Maybe a neighbor will scream from the other side of the street, and everything is constitutional. In my case, this will come to be in my poetic. But Losas de Familia came to me during the pandemic. Like many others, I felt this sword over my head. And at that moment, I wanted to say something, but at the same time, I didn't, because I didn't want to have this communication of prose saying this, that, and whatever. So I had to find a path, not a hybrid pathway, a path that I would need to contain my poem, cut the poem to produce something that would be broader, longer. So my struggle with Losas de Familia was between the extension and the non-extension of what I needed to say. I hope I made myself understood, Patricia. It is at the same time an idea of embodiment of those who write and read, and not saying everything at the same time, but you say things at the same time as you don't say. And while I was listening to your answer, so how can you react to a way of reacting to your text, which is non-read, embodied, sensorial, intuitive. How do you react to a critique? This is something I always ask myself. How do you react? How the poetry teacher, professors, how can we write something about a book such as yours? How can we criticize this? A book such as yours will raise this question, will allow us to ask ourselves, how are you able to deal with this? Reading your work, for instance, in Louças de Família. This is a very complex question to answer, because in my understanding, poetry is what will break away with the common sense of a language. Poetry is what will twist and fold something that will say where someone has dug a hole. And this is why you have the wells of the Marianas, Poço das Marianas in Portuguese. And it seems that this type of poetry that wants to keep what is real at arm's length, this supposed reality. We do not have access to reality. That is not a linguistic reality. So what language are we talking about? This language, for instance, of the other, of which psychoanalysis always refers to, this bigger other that will alienate us from others. We are black, a woman, and poor, this and that, and this and that. So when I say everything is constituted by language, it will happen in alienation and the lack of meaning. But the poetry of Poços, wells, will try to force language through. When we talk in the presence of our body, of the black body, of a woman's body, or of a trans body, what are we talking about? We're forcing something. We're forcing a language to say something that it was until then unable to present. So this pressure, this forcing, will produce another language, like Annie Césaire did in her social surrealism. And this language, this French language, as a poet, I will use it as it is presented to me, this language that will make me be subjected to it, because language already has a meaning for us, and it's a ready meaning. In my understanding, it is the meaning of this language. So these books will demand the reader to deliver themselves, and we need to tighten, we need to streamline the ready-made meanings. We have to put understanding in suspension, but we use this in order to understand a type of poetry that wishes to create another world. Politically speaking, we're talking about creating another world with less inequalities, in which everyone can live with dignity. And this is what poetry wants to do too. A new world wants to be created by poetry. But this message is not presented that way. It is presented by this streamlining of the sense of the meaning of the words through this forceful understanding. Thank you. So what you just said will bring me to my third question that I would like to address to Lubi Prates. Lubi, the verse, my body is my positionality, my stance. It was written in 2018. It will not only deconstruct the traditional idea, for instance, a Brazilian exiled writer in Europe, but it also will show another type of uprooting inside Brazil itself, a body that will not fit inside its own country, but it is its own country individually, and above all, it is material, it is embodied. So I would like to hear from you. Well, if you could talk about this idea of uprooting, of exile, and poetry as an act of exile. Is this poem a country? Is it a poetry of an exile? Thank you for your question, Patrícia. This verse is almost a slogan, a motto. If I were to candidate myself as a president, I would probably write it. my body is where I speak from. And I wrote this poem when I was already ready to publish Corpo Negro, A Black Body, and a free translation. This was 2018. And Elza Soares, a Brazilian singer, launched Deusa Mulher, Woman Goddess, where she works with the verse, my country is from where I speak. And this image was for many years in my mind. This music would be repeating itself in my mind. And I was already considering about the issue of territory, about what it meant to me to be a Brazilian woman, to be a black woman in Brazil. And I was thinking about my process of racial positioning to answer this question. And my experience has shown me that it is a process of being a foreigner inside your own country, to consider all the violences against native population, the First Nations, the black people that were brought here forcefully, gave me the idea, the meaning that I do not belong to this country that was built in such a way. And so I will build in O Corpo Negro, the black body, this whole idea of the self. What does it mean to me to be a black woman? What meaning will I give or bring to this word? And I was able to see that my body would be my territory. And I wrote these verses. My body is my place of speech or my positionality. The body is what allows me to be here. It is the territory itself that will be surpassed by any experiences in my daily life. And, well, that's it. This will be my first answer. And this has to do with what Eliane was saying about this production, the bodily, embodied production. What is your process of writing a poem? Is it also with your rhythm, with your pace or ideas? How do you start it? I use imagery, so I'm a poet of images. So I will have this image in my mind until I am able to stop and write a poem about that image. So when I write, I repeat it because I want to do away with that image. I want to deal with all the aspects of that image. So my body is my place of speech. This you'll hear it all the time. My body is my place of speech, and I talk about my race, and I repeat, and I will empty. I will deplete this image as much as I can, and the verses. And I'm really interested in really depleting, I guess, emptying. Because from this emptiness, I'm able to create something new, or the reader will be able to create something new. Thank you. Thank you. Beautifully said. My fourth question is for the three of you. You are also translators, the three of you. And as I said regarding Laura, writing and translating will sometimes be confused one with the other. And sometimes both professions cannot be separated of the identity, or from the identity of those who write, translate, and produce. Could you maybe comment about these differences in professions? Maybe we can start by Eliane, and whoever wishes to start. Who would like to go first? I translated other poets, such as Virginia Brindes de Salas, Uruguayan, like Jorgina Herrera, and Cuban. And I coordinated other translations of the Argentinian poet Gabriela González Paz, and the novelist from Puerto Rico, Mayra Santos Febres. And I have a difficulty with translating because of this way of placing things, of this other person, this person that writes something based on a reference that I am unaware of. and I will come closer to that text through my own references. There are no other references that are not my own. So, for instance, Rorina Herrera will write palenque. She will use the word palenque in a poem called Oriki for myself. I am the one who escapes, the fugitive, the one who opened the doors of the farmhouse, of the plantation house, and there weren't routes through which, or wells through which I have not skipped. And she uses the word palenque. And you might say, well, palenque is the same as a quilombo. Quilombo is a reduction of palenque, or it'd be a metaphor for a palenque that will replace another word. So here we are considering in the sense of a displacement of a word and to replace by another. Not necessarily this word is that word, but palenque will be seen within this Africanality for the word quilombo with its uniqueness. So I will sometimes take risks, creating things that are not part of the poem, and I understand that the poem will say more or less of what is being said, of what the poet actually wrote there, because sometimes we don't even know what is written there in this poem, written in the novel. The reader will say, oh, this is what is written here. So these limits, Patricia, are fluid. Also, according to the storyteller's point of view or standpoint, there's a risk of putting a word here for the poem to work better, so to speak, than the actual word that meant that same word. I feel that this process will influence and something will move your writing. Yes, this happened in the Poço das Marianas, because Poço das Marianas was already in Portuguese, a little bit of Portuñol, and then I went to write the translation with Poço das Marianas into Spanish, and I worked with this poet. When I started working on this, I realized that there were certain echoes, sonorities in Spanish that would produce a poem that was much better than the one written in Portuguese. So I went back to the Portuguese poem and I changed the word for another word that had a similar sound, or even a Portuñol or in Spanish word, because as I said, I'm not interested in the actual meaning of the word. I'm interested in the work in general. If it sounds, if it will impact the reader, to me, I'm good. And if the translation into Spanish made me go back to my Portuguese, because in Spanish I found better solutions in terms of sound, aesthetically, that were not found in the Portuguese version. And in your book, Poço das Marianas, is very particular. It is written in two languages. It's bilingual. So what was the idea of writing it this way? Well, during the pandemic also, I was always taken aback by this issue. Well, I know different poets from Europe, from the US, even African poets, and I don't know the poets that are here in Uruguay, in Argentina, in Chile, in Ecuador. What are they doing? What are they saying? What are they producing? What are they breaking away with at this given moment? So I started trying to find poets, especially black poets, Argentinians, Uruguayans, and from this, what Laila Gonzalez will call América Latina, Americas, Latin America, Americas, and Africa. So from that point on, we created Horizonoro, this project that will allow us to have the translation and understanding of Spanish poets into Portuguese. So this is where I understood that we have an interesting dialogue. However, this dialogue is sometimes separated by a wall, because we as Brazilians, we think that if we're the big center of the Latin American, we're not. We share with these women experiences, stories, sufferings, pains, and joys. And this is what I found in these poems, in the Horizonoro project. And this completely changed my understanding of what poetry is and the way I write. Now, the more I correct, the more I change the language of my poem, and the more I influence my poem with other languages. This is what I want as an aesthetic object. Thank you. Thank you. Laura, Would you like to answer the question?
Listening to Eliane, and I was thinking, I tried to imagine how it would be for me to write poetry without working as a translator as well, because I think that translation gives the possibility of enriching your own identity. Answering the question, it's an identity that begins to strengthen, to become more variable, and to become opens infinite possibilities, which are all language of these people that people translate, which change the language as a writer, my own writing. So I think that when I write, I'm constantly stealing everything that I learn and changing the word with the sound in Spanish. When I translate in English, and it's somewhat difficult, there's always this way of stealing sounds, stealing music from that which we are translating, and this constant dialogue with the person that you translate. Even when the person has died already, there's a constant dialogue, even with that deceased person. I'd like to tell the story, a quick story of I would love to translate God. It's been translated here into Portuguese by Paloma Vidal and Cisa Brand, and they decided to add footnotes where they talk with what I'm saying, and they tell their own experiences concerning my experience with translation. And my feeling is that it's a new book that they've assembled where the identities mix. It's wonderful what happened. It's a book by all three where we can engage in dialogue, which is what I was trying to say in my book. I came with this idea of unpractical idea. The book is translated from Portuguese to another language, and the new translators also include their footnotes. It's a constant dialogue.
When you were translating the book, did you communicate with them? Was this a sort of collaboration, or you only saw the observations later when the book was ready?
We contacted each other when we were almost finished and did a Zoom meeting. I read their version first, and I annotated some things that I wanted to come in, and they'd made their own notes as well. And we had a long conversation on Zoom where we commented on all these things and other things, because the translation has that. When you talk about translation, we always talk about each person's life and the life in the world, right? So that's how it was like, for me, the beginning of a friendship, which we're consolidating here in Paraty. That really makes me happy as well. Thank you.
I love talking about translation. It's such a pleasure to be here with other three translators actually talk about this. I started translating from Spanish, and translation was part of my learning process of learning a new language. And I translated many women poets from Latin America. But there was this moment that I actually changed my trajectory and my literary trajectory, a watershed moment, when I recognized myself as a Black woman. This also transformed the translation I was doing. We live in a country in which 50% of the population is Black. And a small part of this population is able to have access to education, have a second or third languages. And I had the opportunity of studying the languages that I was interested in. And in studying English, and with the first proposal to work as a translator, which would be to translate Maya Angelou, I decided I was only going to work translating Black people, because I wanted the population, the group that I am part of, to have access to poetry and theories that would change my life. So I translated André Laudry, Maya Angelou, Clifton, Jim Jordan, and others, with the hopes of listening. This poetry would transform lives. And this is the main thing about translation. And this is the reason for which I became a translator. Today I'm interested in translation also to work collectively. I guess the process of writing poetry will leave us in a very lonely place because you're just sitting there with our sheet of paper, our pen, trying to find solutions. And I can see this also in translation. Sometimes you have to find meanings and solutions, and you're alone because the writer has already died. We no longer have access to her. And it is an immense challenge. So today I've worked in partnerships. And this has helped me a lot of solving doubts, being able to consult with someone. And this will certainly enrich my work because then I'm not using my own references as a translator. I have someone else's reference helping me. And this I would like to refer to Ana Meira, who translated with me the Flora Nuapa book, and Jade Medeiros, who translated the books of Jenny Grange with me. And I guess it is good to be a poet when you translate poetry because there are challenges. Those who wrote certain texts, it wasn't me. And I have to understand whose voice is that person presented, where her choices, to respect that, to not fill it with myself, with Lubi, work that is not mine. So I will translate. Sometimes many things are there in my mind, and I have my pen and paper to write my poetry. Two questions. The idea of collectiveness, the idea referred to based on translation. Have you ever considered what to do it with poem, to have collective poetry? That would be also an option. Why not? A choice. And the second question, really quick here. Could you think about an example of maybe things that you have in your mind that you're unable to put into the translation and then maybe brought you to write a specific text, maybe a practical example, something like that? I guess when I translated Maya Angelou, I wrote an essay referring to how that translation happened, because to me it was urgent. It was an urgent matter to translate Maya Angelou. Because many people knew her poetry, a specific poem of hers. And there is a wealth in the production of that poem. And I wanted to do this. So there was this sense of urgency. And I said, I have to talk about how this process worked for me of bringing into Brazilian Portuguese what Maya was saying. But specifically in terms of poetry, no, I do not remember if having written anything. Have you written yourself a poem after having translating Maya? No, not a poetry, an essay. Because I'm in a poetic desert, so to speak, now. Well, it's part of writing poetry. And one last question also for the three of you again. And before, again, so I would like to remind you again, if you have these little slips of paper, and you can just write down your questions, and they will be brought to me. So, last question to the three of you. You live in different ways between languages, borders, cultures, and you're also translated into Portuguese, Spanish, or English. How do you see this issue, this intercultural issue, based on the idea of a poem as an intercultural vehicle, interdisciplinary, interlinguistic mean? In writing a poem, do you think about writing in other languages, with other readers in other places? Maybe we can start with Laura.
In my case, I I don't think if anyone or the readers, when I write children's books, which was that I've been doing in the last 15, 20 years, sometimes I have a thought that gets ahead of me about how this could be received in the publishing world in Argentina first and sometimes in other countries as well. But when I write poetry, no. For me, it's an intimate, lonely time. I don't even imagine it's going to be published in the original language. Later, sometimes, I imagine it, but as a habit, as a translator, I try to imagine how it could be translated. No, because I don't actually think it's going to be translated and published in other languages, because it's not what's happened that often with me. It's like a dream for me that these books be published in Brazil, for example, and sometimes in English. But when I'm interested to get involved, I think it's magic. Sometimes on the other side, I don't know what people ask the author if you don't know what to answer. And sometimes what's happened thus far with me with these books, like with some children's books, when they were translated into languages that I can understand and that I can read between the lines at least, or guess, I'm interested in seeing what was said in each case. And sometimes even I intervene and I bother the translators a little bit, but not that much.
And in case of a children's book, is it another type of translation, right? You have to translate things for children. How does that happen for you?
I work a lot translating children's books. It's one of the things that I love to do. And recently I got involved in translating from Italian, which is the language that I've studied to a certain extent. And it's a similar process translating for adults or children. Perhaps there's more intervention by the publishers at a line, editorial line. Sometimes the book is going to be translated in different places. That's happened in general with Spanish, right? The interventions by the publishers, the children's books, or sometimes there's a intervention not only linguistic but ideological, but it's not that common. It's virtually the same process, both in the translation and writing things for children in general. That's very similar. The children are people, right? It's basically the same. Thank you so much.
Well, I am a black woman, and I was born in Santana do Livramento between Uruguay and Brazil. And if the population of Santana do Livramento from Rivera, if they could go from one city to the other without any kind of obstacle or borders, for us black people, it was very difficult even to walk inside the city itself, with reserved spaces for black, white clubs for blacks and whites. So this is where you should work, this is where you should live. So access to this territory, which is the city with this black body, was always an access that was filled with obstacles. And we could not have access to this. When we decided to start writing, to say something different from what is our destination, of what was given to us as our destination, we're breaking away with these borders. We are producing something that is not yet intercultural. I wouldn't say that I'm going to bring in something from here and there and I will produce something, but we are producing something that is new inside this territory. So we are breaking down these walls. As a poet and as a translator, I do use this. As Carla Acutirene said earlier, a reference to Exu, the first Exu, the one that eats everything. Exu likes to eat everything, but then they will spit out what he ate, and he makes of this a new social pact, which is a new way of psychoanalysis thinking, the social pact based on his shoe. So in a brief comment, a lateral comment here, a parenthesis, the way we eat words. I eat words from African literature, Chino Achebe, Wale Shoinka, and here from the Caribbean. So I eat these words. I devour them. I register them. Words that are in Igbo, in Yoruba, in Spanish. And then I bring this back to my poetry because I'm interested in things that are not a meaning but as a resonance. What this word means, how will this actually happen in my poetry, as I do with my characters too, African literature, the Caribbean literature. I'm not sure if this was a question. I hope I have at least said something. I never know what the question is. To be translated gave me the idea of the responsibility it is to translate, because I guess you need to have great trust in those who are translating. Who are we going to give our words to? And I don't think of a poem of mine will be translated while I'm producing it. I cannot think about the destination, the destiny of my poem. So the translation process in my book was very surprising, very natural. There is this poem that is well known called Condição Imigrante, Immigrant Condition. And when I published O Corpo Negro, people started having access to my work, to my poem in other countries, and they identified themselves there. And then very spontaneously, they wanted to translate it into French, to Catalan, to Croatian, to German, Italian. And as the editions of my book were being renewed, I was including these translations also with a QR code that you will have access to. The reading that the translator had in his or her native language. So it was an interesting process because they were able to ask me, what did you mean by this? What is the metaphor you have here? And I was answering. And when the book was translated, it was a joint process. I was able to say, this is what I meant. This is the imagery I wish you to work with. It is interesting because I was translated by white people that had the ability of asking me, what do you mean? I didn't understand. And we worked together so that the translation would work. I also work with other languages in my poetry. There are verses that I work in Spanish especially, but I also have written in English because this is how the poem came to me. And then someone else translated this into Portuguese. And I guess this work between languages is so rich, is so creative. It's to extrapolate the language you know. It is to play, to err, to get it wrong, and experiment. Thank you. I'm going to ask before I ask the last question. And for the questions from the audience, I will ask you to read another poem. If we have time, maybe for a second poem, and maybe an excerpt from your novel. I don't know. I don't know who would like to read first. Maybe Lubi would like to read something. I will read this poem I referred to. Immigrant Condition. 1. Since I arrived, a dog is following me around. And even though I walk for kilometers and obstacles between us, I feel its breath on my neck. And the dog follows me. And I can't go all to fancy places. I cannot use a different dialect than I have here. So I kept all my jargon in the back of my suitcase, and the dog will growl. Since I arrived here, a dog follows me, and this dog, I call him immigration. 2. A country that growls at you, a city that growls at you, the streets that growl at you, like a wild dog. Forget that whole childish idea, the child memory of petting a dog, of a hand petting your own dog. a dog that stayed somewhere else in another country. Strangely enough, because rage is not controlled in your country. And here, it's not controlled either. A city dog growling at you like a wild dog.
Eu vou ler outro.
I'm going to read another excerpt from Louças de Família. Well, your bed pot was used in the Second World War as a helmet. Now, I was working in a coal business. His home looked like a cave, and it was squeezed between two houses on the Hangman's Road. My grandmother would send me there every morning or every week to buy coal for our cold days in the winter, or maybe for a Sunday barbecue, whenever. At that cave in the coal mine, there was a painting saying that the cobra vai fumar. This was the only decoration object in 1 year that I was able to recognize in her house. It was not a matter of the humanity, but the lack of ability of recognizing humanity that would be diverse from what I knew.
I had a lemon in my hand. It's so perfect to hold, a lemon. I knew that before. Lemons are so perfect. I woke up, look at my hand. There's nothing in it except lemon. It's the skin is so, the perfume, the scent, the acid, the lemon is in the hand are the same for a minute.
Before I have the questions from the audience, I will briefly ask you if you could share with us future projects. What are you doing? What are you working with now? What do you hope to do in the next few years or days? I am now dedicated to write about maternity. I was recently a mother. My son will be 2 in December. And when he was born, I felt mobilized. I dedicated myself in poetry exclusively. I started writing essays because this birth gave me many words, brought many words with it, words that will just flow out from me. So I talked about maternity, and I just concluded an essays books regarding maternity. So that's what I'm doing now. Thank you. Eliane? I am working different projects at the same time, but I'm going to highlight one of them. It is a novel, and the main characters are 3 women. One is a seamstress, one is makes braids, and one is
Elas participam de uma revolução.
A washerwoman, and they participated in a revolution that will happen in the Rio Grande do Sul. And this revolution was spearheaded by a quilombola called Manuel Padeiro. And he's already a character in Louças de Família. So this novel will be about the involvement of these women in that revolution. How did they participate in this quilombo? How did they participate in the treasons against the colony at that time?
I write poetry in general. When I'm working on a project, it's kind of spontaneous, and I don't write every day, or not even every week, or even every month. I am in the process of writing 3 books for children. They're just being illustrated, these books, that make me very happy. But basically, for the immediate future, I suppose soon, how we're going to continue to live in Argentina after the outcome of the recent election. It's going to be 4 years where probably culture will be not very important, much less poetry. That's basically a warning, an alert, a state of alert. What's going to happen starting in December 10th, when the president-elect takes office.
Thank you for answering all these things. I'd like to thank you all again. And now I will read some of the questions. This is from Eliane Fernandes. The authors Lubi and Eliane and Laura, considering that literature will create different worlds, how can they bring us together to freedom that abolition and democracy did not guarantee for Black people and Native people in Latin America? It's a very complex question. We don't have that much time. Maybe one of you would like to address this matter? Could you just give me, could I read the question in writing? Yes, of course. It seems that the question is about how literature will help produce a new world in which traditional politics, represented here by the so-called democracy, was unable to produce. It seems that this is sort of the question. I do not have a conception of literature as a tool that will help us transform the world. First of all, this literature will change our own world. First, as a Black woman, I will go from the place of a woman that was unable to read, to write, to that can write, can read, the one that can also do. That will help the poems be read and seen. It is a change of conception of what, in terms of what the subject can do in this this world. This is already a change. This literature will sponsor a plurality of voices, as long as the publishing houses will also allow these voices to be heard. As a writer, as a poet, I used to write, but my books did not circulate, they were not sold. So what kind of change is this? It is necessary to involve the whole editorial market, not only an author to produce something, and something to be there enclosed and forgotten in a drawer or be only circulated in a micro territory. You have to have everyone involved. And it is literature, but it's also the editorial market that has to be involved in this change. I believe in the potential of literature as something that it will be transformative in all worlds. I did this research of poets called the first poets, and I was able to see that in their writing, how much they were talking about Brazil, about the experience that they had in this country, gender, race. And this changed the way I produced. This changed my life. So I do believe in the potential of literature, of telling stories. And we're here telling stories, our stories, and I guess this will transform the world, and it's transformative. But I do agree with Eliane. It's not just a matter of producing. Black people are writing. When you do research, when you go to the publishing houses that are dedicated to publishing Black people, you see full bookshelves. I work in an editing house, and I have many originals submitted to me, but that's not enough. The change in the market has to be a macro change. It has to be present in the festivals and the awards, in the bids, the tenders, and this is what will be transformative. Thank you. Laura, would you like to say something about this? A final comment?
I believe that I don't know if I'm the one that should answer this question, but I'd love hearing the answers by the other two writers.
I would like to invite the public to come with the authors to the bookshop. They will be signing their work. We will be there for some time signing their books. And we'll also like to invite you to participate on the next session with Nora Krug and Enrique Bertolucci, mediated by Gabriela Maia. Thank you so much for attending.